Welcome to Business Over Brew. Pleased to be joined in this episode by Matt Schrimpf, president of Piasa Motor Fuels. Matt, thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. I want to start here. Who were E.W. Schrimpf and Charles Marsh?
So they worked together down at the Glassworks, and I believe the story goes when the Great Depression hit, they were looking for a different opportunity. So E.W. is my great-grandfather, and a co-worker of his decided to go out on their own and start Piasa Motor Fuels.
And I think if I have it right, that was 1932, yes. 87 or so years ago.
Well, so 90.
90 years ago now,
is,
right?
is 1932, and actually April, we're this month we're celebrating our 90th anniversary.
Congratulations! In 90 years, what have been some of the keys to keeping the business flourishing for that many years?
Well, my grandfather understood early on that he needed to plan, that death is inevitable. It's kind of morbid to think about it in a sense, but he knew it was very important to plan and to pass the business along. So he did that early on to his 3 children, and I joined the company in 95, and we did some planning with some outside resources. My uncle said that he'd be interested in doing other things, so my dad and his sister, Ann Davis, bought Mark out in 97, and then just kind of keeping with the, that trend of planning, my sister and I bought my aunt out in 2000, and then my sister and I bought my dad out in 2010. So, number one, you've got to have people that are interested in the business.
Sure.
And number two, you've got to have people within the business that are willing to talk about have the hard discussions, and be willing to pass it along or sell to the next generation.
Now, your grandfather was Robert, correct?
Correct, Bob.
And I guess he must have learned that because his father died at a pretty young age where Bob was in high school.
Yes.
And I was just reading a little bit on the website that I guess he was going to high school during the day and then working for the company at night.
That's right. Yeah, it was survival mode. His mother took out the loans to keep the company going because, as you mentioned, he was in high school. He didn't have any credit, so he would go to high school in the mornings and run the business in the afternoons. That's right.
And I guess we should start here. Just tell us a little bit about what the company does, what Piasa Motor Fuels does.
Sure. So we still have a traditional jobbership, and that's what I mean by that is we sell diesel fuel and gasoline to end users. So if somebody has a construction business or a farmer, if they need fuel, we sell fuel or gasoline to those types of customers. We also have a hauling business. So a Moto Mart or a Huck's, Clinton County Shells, we do a lot of hauling for those customers. We also do some Circle K's in the St. Louis market. So a lot of logistics. But the main driver for our business is the wholesaling of petroleum and renewable fuels. And we do that through various pipeline terminals. We own one in North Little Rock, Arkansas, North City, Illinois, Seymour, Indiana, and then the biggest one is the one in Hartford, Illinois.
Okay, so it started here, and that's still where the headquarters are, and,
that's right.
and the biggest one. So interesting. We were talking a little bit before we turned the cameras on just about gas prices and kind of consumer expectations of what prices are. Just talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Sure. So as you mentioned earlier, when it's got a 4 in front of it, people feel that that's expensive, and it is. And we personally don't like high gas prices.
Right.
People buy less. Volume is opportunity is the way we look at it. But it's a global commodity. But at the same time, we have plenty of resources here in the ground. But it's quite interesting to think that we can take a barrel of oil from the ground, pump it to a refinery, refine it from crude oil into gasoline and diesel fuel, ship it through a pipeline, put it into a terminal, take it by truck from the terminal to a gas station, and take it out of the gas station and put it in your car. And then in Illinois, 80 cents of that is tax.
Right.
So for $3.20, you're bringing a raw material out of the ground, refining it into a usable product, and then it goes in your car to and what, a gallon, you're getting 30 miles now a day. So it's pretty interesting business.
It is, and just one that we kind of take for granted until something bad happens, I guess, or bad in our minds of prices going up. If it's, you probably don't get a lot of "hey, thanks a lot" compliments when it's low.
I don't think that's ever happened.
Why the name? Probably an obvious answer, but the name Piasa, where did that? Just because of the local legend?
I would say that yes, the local legend. That was a few years before my time, but I would think that the being down on Broadway, that's where the first business was at. I think just being local, two local guys trying to start a business, it had to try and just keep a name everybody was familiar with.
Well, I will say I think you guys have done a great service to the community by phonetically spelling it on the billboard out in front of the out in front of your office. So now more people know how to say Piasa.
Sure.
I think I'm saying it right anyway.
Yes.
What are give me maybe one or two key decisions in the history of the company that have led you to where you are today?
So I think the first one would be in 1976. My grandfather and a business partner bought that terminal facility down in Hartford. They bought it from Artco. He was provided an opportunity where they promised him so many gallons of throughput a month. So think of throughput as a warehousing fee. Mm-hmm. So you own the asset, people bring in their product, and then they pay you a fee to put it over your loading rack. And they promised him enough volume that he could make the mortgage payment. So he took a chance, got into a business he knew nothing, a piece of the business he knew nothing about.
Right.
And he was very aggressive. He was always trying to figure the next piece out. I mean, he was already into the transportation. He was already into the convenience store business. He was into the lubricants business. And he's like, well, let's try the terminal business. And it's seemed pretty risk averse at the time. But
right.
The terminal's the less expensive part. It's the inventory and the volatility of the markets behind it. But that led us to probably our biggest event, I should say, in 2004, in which we bought 3 additional pipeline terminals. So that is really the nucleus of what drives our business from the size that it is. But we still are taking a much better focus on that tank wagon business and the end user business here in the local community.
So 2004, big decision there. Talk about what went into that decision. I'm sure there were some discussion about it anyway, and some pros and cons.
So I was talking with a customer, Huck's Convenience Stores.
Sure.
And they knew a terminal was for sale down where their headquarters is at, and introduced me to a couple of people, and we put a bid in on the asset down in North City, and they said, oh, we like what you offered here, but you got to buy all 3 of these terminals. So that was the Seymour, Indiana, mm-hmm. North City, and North Little Rock terminals. And we weren't sure we wanted to take that big a bite. That right. was, we went from having one terminal and right here where we're close to home to all of a sudden we're looking to be in areas that are hundreds of miles away. It's a big change. But my father had full confidence in his staff, including myself, and he's like, let's do this. And as we went through the process, again, we realized the terminal assets were the cheap part. The big deal was getting the banks on board to lend us the money for the inventory and receivables that we'd sell across those facilities.
Right. What are some goals for the next year, 5 years, and what are some challenges that you guys are facing?
So obviously the high prices are a challenge. Mm-hmm. Consolidation within our industry is a challenge. The big keep getting bigger. Many
right.
of our customers are now bigger than us. So mm-hmm. customers of ours would be a pilot as well as
right.
what I mentioned earlier, the Moto Marts and the Hucks, but you've got pilots, you've got Loves, truck stops, TAs, and the customers are really substantially bigger than we are. And
right.
The buying decisions aren't like you would think is a normal commercial relationship. It becomes very number driven mm-hmm. And very little service driven, which is, it's just different. It is what it is, but that makes it difficult. But, as we look down the road, my son's a sophomore in college. My nephew just joined the company a year and a half ago. So 5th generation is in. The 5th generation will have ownership here come this October. So my goal is to leave them a good footing and a good foundation like my father and grandfather did for me. And wherever we're going, if it's electric, if it's gas, if it's hydrogen, put them in a position to where if they want to chase a dream, they're allowed to do the same thing that I was allowed to do.
Certainly a great legacy to leave behind.
Yes.
I wanted to touch on one quick topic. Just you guys have delved into the retail side of things, the Piasa pantries. And just talk about that endeavor and I guess experience with that.
Sure. So most of this was before I really started with the
Right.
company, but you're in a family business. The dinner table, I was getting board meetings almost every night.
Right.
But so the retail, my grandfather was in several joint ventures throughout Illinois, and ended up getting out of all of them. But then we had the 5 stations here locally for many, many years called the Piasa Pantry. So we had Godfrey, Alton, Wood River, Hartford, and West Alton.
Right.
Well, you're every location was 5 miles away from being in Missouri. So you were talking at the time a 40 cent a gallon tax in Illinois, so the sales tax plus the motor fuel tax, versus 17 cents in Missouri. And you have to drive to make the purchase. I mean, it's the gas business, right?
Sure.
So
right.
it was a tough market. We would be at maybe making a few cents a gallon, and then by the time people used credit cards, you weren't.
Sure.
And then cigarettes were kind of in the same boat where they just had a huge advantage, and it was just a very difficult business when you're on a border area and you're dealing with such a tax disparity.
Yeah. Last 2 questions. Talk about just doing business in the Riverbend area.
Sure. Well, a lot of great people. Born and raised here. We do like our tank wagon business and growing that because of the loyalty that exists. It's a lot different than when you're going and calling on national chains.
Sure.
It's just a different feeling, and like I said,
A little
it
more
becomes
relationship
more numbers,
driven.
very relationship driven. People are just so down to earth here. I'm not going to say that they're necessarily sympathetic because, again, petroleum's
Sure.
a hot topic for everybody.
Right, yeah.
But they do understand, and they're curious to know what drives your business, and they ask good questions. We were talking about Sam Roberts earlier. He always likes to ask very good questions about why oil is doing what it's doing, and I give you my best guess because I don't know where it's going. But the Riverbend's just full of really great people and a lot of long-term businesses and people that my father and my grandfather knew, which is always a nice thing when they've got so many kind things to say about them.
Right. Thanks to Roberts for sponsoring this particular program as well. Thank you very much, Sam and John and everybody out at Roberts Motors. Last question. Words of advice you could give to somebody either maybe struggling with their business now or thinking about getting into owning a business.
Sure. So it's not easy. It's a lot of hours. It doesn't stay at the office. As I mentioned, every night over the dinner table, you learn about it. But I wouldn't trade it for anything. I mean, it's oftentimes there's a nice reward at the end of the day, but you got to work hard for it. And you got to really drive for it. And I always tell my kids, we are very fortunate. My grandfather worked 10 years to be worth $250. Said you probably have shoes that might be worth that I probably don't want to know about.
Right.
But it's business is not easy by any stretch. But if you have the dedication and you have the drive to try and make it work, you don't have to be the smartest one in the room at it, but you got to have that drive and you got that willingness to work and drive for success.
Got to be a little bit of a challenge for you, making sure you tell that story to your kids, because the further away you get from working 10 years to be worth $250, the harder it is to remember that it hasn't always been this way.
I try to tell my employees that because they've all been great. I mean, we've got wonderful employees, long-term employees, so they knew my grandfather, most of them. But I've retired about 8 people with 40 years with us, 2 of them in the last 2 years. So I'm losing that connection from my employees with my dad, grandfather. So I have to I feel it's my duty to explain that, because you walk into a nice office, it didn't happen overnight. It's 90 years of effort.
Right.
And it's not just our effort, it's their effort as well. So yeah, you're spot on. I think it's important when you look around that these businesses took a lot of risk and a lot of effort to get where they are today.
Well, congratulations on 90 years. Here's to 90 more, at least.
Thank you.
And if people want to learn more about Piasa Motor Fuels, how can they do that?
So our website, the easy one's hwrtoil.com or piasamotorfuels.com. And, feel free to browse around, give us a call if you have any questions, and be happy to help with any fuel needs somebody might have.
Great. Matt, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.